if there is a non-human intelligence, like beyond Earth, or even maybe here on Earth, but invisible to us, it would try to contact us through the memes and the ideas and the images that we're expecting. So it would show up as a UFO. It would show up as a gray alien. It would like it's actually a psychedelic communication. It's like linking up with your consciousness to show you something that you are going to say like, "Oh, I've seen that in a movie," and pay attention. And actually has nothing to do with a UFO or a spaceship or a gray alien. It's like they're just trying to get contact. And that once the contact is made, people who've had contact report all sorts of crazy changes in consciousness. No one cares about that. They just care about the spaceship. But if you talk to these people, they're like, no, everything in my life changed after that. And it wasn't about contact with aliens, it was about my own consciousness changing. And that sounds a whole lot more like psychedelics to me than, interstellar travel.
Hey everyone, welcome to Pursuit of Infinity. I'm your host, Josh, and today I'm rejoined by returning guest, Katherine MacLean. Katherine, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's great to be back. It feels like time is going very slowly, and also every time there's a new year, it feels like yesterday. So maybe this is what all the old people talk about when time starts to get really funky as you get older.
I totally agree. When I think of time, it's often like, depending on what I'm thinking about, it's either it feels like yesterday or it feels like far longer ago than what it was. Like when I think about my childhood, depending on what it is I'm thinking about, it's like, man, that was like just yesterday. But then if I'm thinking about last year, it feels like it was forever ago.
Right. Well, it feels like certainly since I finally published my book, that was like a demarcation of how time was moving and how time is very different since that point. So like that transition was a very different orientation of time. And now everything before that feels very, very long ago. And everything since that point is like working in a different frequency. It's like at the same time, very slow day to day, but like each year seems to just like flip by.
Yeah,
So,
it makes me think about like just time in general and how we think of it as being on a linear chronological timeline. And as we're going to get into, when you've been to, these otherworldly realms through psychedelics or meditation or whatever it may be, you realize that time isn't structured that way. It's almost as if I like to use the analogy of like if you put your hand on a hot stove for 5 seconds, it feels like 5 hours. You know what I mean? It's
yes.
almost as if time is based off of personal and individual experience as opposed to like a mathematical measurement.
Yeah. Well, and it's also, I mean, one of the things that I've gotten really interested in is how time changes depending on, well, age for one thing, but also like how close you are to either birth or death. And it's like time really slows down around the two end points of life, like the beginning and the end, and things go really internal. And I think that that's where the psychedelics maybe help us remember that space of birth and death, right? Because it's like psychedelic time, birth, and death time feel very similar to me. And so I keep thinking about like, how does time go when someone is getting close to the end of life? It's like very different than folks who are kind of in the middle.
Yeah, that's a very interesting observation because we can definitely think back to when we were children, at least earliest memories, and it does feel like time is much slower, dramatically slower. And, just from experiencing like people on their deathbed, often wondered the same thing. Like, what are you experiencing in terms of time? Like, how are your, because we think of our days now, I think I wake up, I go to work, I have certain, external stimuli that kind of dictate what I'm feeling. Time sort of takes the trajectory of the day based on how I'm feeling and what I'm doing. But when you're dying, as Ramdas said, like you're busy dying. So,
Yes.
what is it like to evaluate time when you're busy dying?
Yeah.
Big questions, but before we get too deep into the weirdness of life, I would like to give the audience just a quick bio, so they have sort of some context to understand where you're coming from if they haven't listened to the first episode we did. But the bio I have here is Katherine MacLean, PhD, is a scientist and educator known for her groundbreaking research on psychedelics and mindfulness meditation. She conducted studies on psilocybin at Johns Hopkins, exploring its effects on emotional well being and personality. Her memoir, Midnight Water, blends her scientific insights with personal experiences of grief, healing, and transformation. So, why don't we just start by filling in any of the gaps there that you think are very important for people to understand about you, what you are, what you do, and what you've done?
Hmm. Well, I think the most important thing for folks to know, and I used to kind of back into this answer, but I'll just say it right up front, is that when I arrived at Hopkins, I was primarily driven by self experimentation. I really wanted to understand how the science of consciousness applied to life. I was like kind of a very practical but also personal orientation. When I had the opportunity to study long-term meditators, I went on a meditation retreat for the first time. Like I needed to know what it was I was studying from a personal perspective. Same at Hopkins. By the time I got to Hopkins, I had already tried a lot of the drugs that we were proposing to study in the grants that we were writing, in the studies that had already been approved. Now I think people are getting into psychedelics and mindfulness who maybe don't have as much of a personal motivation. And I think there's benefits to both perspectives, right? We need some clinicians who don't meditate, have never been on a retreat, have never taken a high dose of mushrooms to be more objective about what they're observing. Maybe they will see things that I have a blind spot for. And at the same time, I think we need the psychonaut scientists, the psychonaut clinicians who've gone to these places, who, when someone is in a space that a clinician traditionally doesn't understand, it's like the psychonaut can be like, "Hey, I've been to that territory, or I've been to that location before, like let me kind of give you an understanding of where you are right now." And so I was very much on the psychonaut side, and studying mindfulness and psilocybin and some other psychedelics was like my way of almost like validating my own experience back to me. And it felt that there was this like kind of increasingly powerful loop that got created, that the more I studied the thing, the more my consciousness changed, which then fueled the thing I was studying. And when I eventually left Hopkins, I mean, I tell people it's because my sister died of breast cancer, but that was really just kind of like the last straw in a series of very intense and weird experiences I had with my own consciousness that I couldn't understand. So it's like at some point when you think you have a good sense of like what you signed up for, you're like, all right, let's play. Let's do this game. I get paid to do cool research. I'm getting to meet really cool people, go with them on this journey, write some grants, work with some really amazing scientists. And then suddenly I realized that this whole game was being kind of played on me, that there was something beyond what I could observe, that itself was observing the whole process and interacting with the process. And so ever since I left Hopkins, I've been trying to understand what that is. Like, what is this thing that we're participating in that is self aware and is also relational? But then there's something outside of the human experience that itself is, I think, impacting human experience. Some people call it nature, some people call it God. I mean, hell, it could be some other form of intelligence that is just having a great old time watching us flounder on Earth as human beings. I mean, there's so many theories, but I think that's the most important thing for folks to know, is that once I realized the experiment had shifted, that I was no longer the person doing the science, then I was like, all right, I got to figure out what's happening, and I kind of followed this very different trajectory for the last, now what is it, over 10 years since I left Hopkins.
Yeah. And, you bring up, I think, the most important point, which is like there is this, at least to me, there is this thing that interacts with human consciousness in some sort of a way, whether it, like you said, be God or nature or the soul, that for some reason we've lost complete touch with until we actively take steps to re-engage with it. Um, and I think so. You mentioned the study of or the science of consciousness and how it sort of interacts with life and the way that we're living. Back when you began your research, I feel like this wasn't really a thing scientists were interested in, but it seems like nowadays they are. Is that a correct evaluation, you think?
Yeah, so there were people who were starting to study consciousness directly, and there was one conference that I went to in 2012, the Tucson Consciousness Conference, and Robin Carhart Harris, a famous psilocybin researcher now, he and I were kind of both starting to come up through the ranks, and we both got an opportunity to speak at this conference. And weirdly, as soon as I entered the realm of people studying consciousness directly, that's when I had my own personal major break with like how reality had been. And then reality became something different after that. So even being in the presence of people interrogating consciousness changed me irrevocably. And like, it's just wild to me that is it because I was studying openness and, like, the forces that be were like, "Man, this one's totally primed. Let's just see what happens when these interactions happened." Or is it chance? Is it truly chaos? And I just was one of the lucky ones that, it's like you hit um pinball machine and the pinball like, mostly it just goes down the drain and you go again. But like, am I one of the ones who got like stuck in that really cool spot that you got like tons of points all at once and then got kicked out? Like,
That reminds me of there's a conversation between Ram Dass and Terrence McKenna where they're talking about this type of thing, and they're discussing like the chips falling where they may. So, is are the chips falling where they may a sort of by design type of a thing? Like, is that the way things are supposed to be, sort of behind the scenes, or is it chaos? And I think that's a pretty deep question as well.
yeah, it's funny. I actually decided so this dress that I'm wearing was actually designed by my brother's system that's based on Stephen Wolfram's New Kind of Science, which itself is based on it's based in chaos, but it also is based on like continually changing relationships. So like every time one thing changes, everything around that point shifts. And so even though there's no design to begin with, you end up with something that looks intelligent, that looks like it was designed by something intelligent because of all these relationships. And my brother and I have gotten really into like taking an idea or a message or an intention in consciousness, feeding it into his code, this machine, and then like asking, what is the art that gets created out of that? And the funniest thing is you can predict something about the rules going in, but like once you have the pattern, you can't predict back out. You can't like look at the pattern and say, "Oh, I know what the person put into this system." So yeah, I've gotten kind of into that question myself. I think my brother kind of falls on the side of more chaos theory. And I've just had so many experiences where it's super clear that there's some very intelligent thing with agency that is beyond my understanding that I'm like I'm still kind of on the side of some kind of intelligent design. I don't know who or what kind of design, but there definitely seems to be less chaos and more of kind of intention in the universe I've been inhabiting.
I completely agree. And even when I observe chaos in general, it almost feels like the observation of chaos comes from the perception that my mind or my ego gives it. But when you look at chaos from a broader perspective, like if you think about, supernovas and stars exploding, I mean, that's pretty much the most chaotic thing you could ever think of. But it all happens within like this grand tapestry of the creation of planets, the creation of solar systems and galaxies. So it all seems to have at least a function.
Right. Well, and certainly, I mean, I keep thinking about the idea of relationship and the first life form. I mean, it's almost like when life emerged, relationship also emerged. Because, like, before life, there was physical relationship, but there wasn't like intentionality. There wasn't like, I'm trying to get to something for certain reasons. And then that brings me into relationship with other forms of life in the world. So it's like we shifted from some kind of physical rule to a more intention based rule when life emerged. And, obviously, a lot of people know this now, but I just want to say it again because when I heard it, it really hit me that you can't get intelligent life in the universe unless you have a planet that can stay stable for 3 to 4 billion years. And the fact that that even happened is like a miracle. And yes, it could have happened many times over, but like if you really think about the causes and conditions that resulted in human life, it's really unlikely, like highly unlikely that there would be this blip of human intelligence in the midst of like chaos and like basically an abyss. And if that happened again a few other times, like that should be the only thing we care about is trying to make contact with those other forms of intelligent life.
It's incredible. Have you been keeping up with any of this UFO, UAP stuff going on in the government with Congress and all these hearings and everything?
A little bit. It's so what I actually did is I listened to an audiobook by her name is, I think, Diana Pasulka, but she goes
Yeah.
by there's a different name that she goes by when she writes, and she said something in it's pretty highly researched. She interviewed a lot of people who were involved in, either cover-ups or UFO research or extrasensory perception research. And there was a chapter toward the end of the book, and it's not really a spoiler alert. I don't even know if this is an original idea, but I had never heard of it. She said that if there is a non-human intelligence, like beyond Earth, or even maybe here on Earth but invisible to us, it would try to contact us through the memes and the ideas and the images that we're expecting. So it would show up as a UFO. It would show up as a gray alien. It would like it's actually a psychedelic communication. It's like linking up with your consciousness to show you something that you are going to say like, "Oh, I've seen that in a movie," and pay attention. And actually has nothing to do with a UFO or a spaceship or a gray alien. It's like they're just trying to get contact. And that once the contact is made, people who've had contact report all sorts of crazy changes in consciousness. No one cares about that. They just care about the spaceship. But if you talk to these people, they're like, no, everything in my life changed after that. And it wasn't about contact with aliens, it was about my own consciousness changing. And that sounds a whole lot more like psychedelics to me than, interstellar travel. So I've had a couple UFO experiences, and when she framed it that way, and I don't even think it's her original idea, I forget the person that she was kind of referencing. Um, I suddenly was like, oh, like the experiences I've had in psychedelics that feel like I'm communicating with something beyond Earth, the experiences where I think I've seen something in the sky that looks like a UFO, like all those things are the same. It's just like tapping into some other form of communication that if we if we experience the whole thing all at once, it would like we would just become like jello. Like we couldn't process it all in one experience. So instead it like gets kind of they pick one person who's a little bit open and then like titrate it over a lifetime.
I love this idea so much. And yes, Diana Pasulka, she is fantastic. She's one of the best
Do you remember her
researchers.
author name? It's like, does she go by like DW Pasulka or something? I just wanna get it right for people who if they look her up.
I believe it is DW Pasulka.
Yeah,
I think her middle name is probably something with a W, not
yep.
100% sure. She was recently on the Joe Rogan podcast. Like she's doing a whole bunch of stuff. She's actually getting her name out there, which is fantastic. She's one of my favorite researchers within this subject. But yeah, that's a very like Jungian idea. It's almost as if it's a co-creation or like a manifestation of our own consciousness or our own like connection to myth and symbols, where it's almost as if we're creating the imagery of the way that the thing is presenting itself, whatever it might be.
Right. So, like, 2 things come to mind as you were saying that. One is so to continue to tie this back to Hopkins, when I was at Hopkins, there were some psychonauts there who refused to take higher doses of certain drugs because they didn't trust that they would make it back to their body. They had, like, deep faith that they were actually going somewhere that was not on Earth, and that going needed to it's like the conditions needed to be right to make it back into your body. And I remember having this debate with Roland Griffiths and Matt Johnson about like their faith in our procedure. And they were like, well, of course they're going to get back to their body. And I'm like, I don't know. And like, what if get back to your body means that they're like, I don't know, like they can't function anymore, or like a part of them has been lost to this process. Like maybe they're right. And like, yes, they will almost 100% walk out the door alive after any dose of these very safe compounds physiologically. But I don't know what's going to happen to their consciousness. And like, I have to trust that they're saying this may not be a return journey. So that's kind of like the one thing that always stuck with me, that the psychonauts themselves were the ones who really knew the limits of that process and that we were learning from them. And then the second thing is there was one other idea in the book that kind of also I really liked, which is that the UFOs that we experience might actually be versions of ourselves in the future, making sure that we remember certain things and like don't go down this path, but go down this path. And that's again where time gets really funky because it's like, well, like, how is my dead sister communicating with me, but from like a future vantage point? Like, how is she existing in some future space that sees more than I can see, but yet she died, 11, 12 years ago? Or like, how did my daughter, when she was born, one of her first memories was of my sister who she never met? Like, where did they meet? And was that through me? Like, is my consciousness emanating these like holograms out into the universe, like a hologram of my sister in the future, like my daughter picking up on something in my brain that made her think of my sister and then she creates a memory. I don't know. But it's like some people never have these weird experiences. They don't have to worry about it. I have them all the time. So it's like I kind of have to spend some time trying to sort it out.
Yeah, these things are hard to think about if you're trying to put them into the box of like the physicalist materialist paradigm, which is what we always try to do because we don't really have much else to go on in terms of like our tools of measurement. But that's where the psychedelics come in because they can really show you that these things they're real. Like what you're discussing, what you just laid out there with your daughter and your sister and what Diana Pasulka talks about, like there's a there. To me, this stuff is real.
Yep. Um, can I share this cute little anecdote where so Roland Griffiths was my mentor. He died about a year ago. He was a huge figure in the field for anyone who knows psilocybin research. He kind of brought it back to life after a long period of coma. And even though he had experienced his own psychedelic trips and meditation and had seen everything I had seen at Hopkins times, 10 because he'd been there longer than I had. At the end of his life, he said he still was not expecting anything. He was like, it's going to be nothing. And I was like, no way, I can't. Like, and we had this whole discussion about a year before he died. And I made him promise, I was like, listen, if there's something and not nothing, you have to come back in a way. Like, give me some sign that's unmistakably Roland so that I know that you've made it somewhere, some version of you. So anyway, this summer, it's coming up on a year since his death. I had COVID for the second time in a year, which is just like I I hate this virus. Some people have only gotten to experience it like once or twice. I keep getting it. Like it's also weirdly connected with mushrooms for me. So I've just kind of surrendered to like whatever this virus force is and whatever mushrooms are. They're doing some dance. I'm caught in the middle of it. So I'm just like, just help me understand what's happening. So I have COVID and I'm driving to Rhode Island. Why, you might ask? Well, I had already booked an Airbnb for vacation and I couldn't cancel it. So I'm like trying to get to Rhode Island on COVID with my daughter in the car, not really in the best state, like mentally. And suddenly this car zips in front of me, and it's the exact same car that Roland used to drive at Hopkins, but only some of the time. So he had a Lotus sports car, which I've never seen anywhere else other than parked across from our research lab. And Roland gave me a ride in it like once, and it was like the coolest thing ever, but it was like a toy sports car. Like no one has a sports car like this. I think like 100 are made a year. And it was the same color as my car that came to me in a dream from my dead father, this like bright blue, which is also this like little Ganesh that I have. So like suddenly in that moment I was like, "Oh shit, hi Roland." Like it's the Lotus car, it's bright blue. It's like he picked the perfect symbol that I could not mistake as anything other than him. And then, I kept driving and it was just like, yeah, of course that was Roland. And then like later I was trying to tell someone this story and they're like, "Yeah, kind of just a coincidence." I was like, "I don't know." Like if you're not open, then yeah, you might just blow it off and be like, "Oh, that's cute. That made me think of Roland." But I can't like put my finger on why for me it's like I knew in that moment, there he is. Like something happened, not nothing.
Well, when you've experienced these types of synchronicities in the past, or you experience them all the time, then you can be open enough to understand them. And you wrote about that ride he gave you in the book. So, like when you said Lotus, I was like, oh no shit. And
Yeah.
I'm with you. I totally understand.
No, and I think, I mean, you can go overboard, right? Like, you could be like, every car I see, every license plate means something. It's really not like that. Like, this was one experience in over a year since he's died. I haven't had any other experiences where like a hawk flies by and I'm like, that's Roland, or like a butterfly, or like, but these times when people have these connections, it's usually so specific. And the way that people talk about it, they're not, you could tell they're not making it up. They're not trying to like fabricate a cool story about their dead relative. It's like, it's almost like shocking. Like, how could this dead person's consciousness interact with reality so specifically that it would be unmistakable? And, like, if we get that when we die, like, is that how fun it is? Like, is that, like, the moment where you become this, like, grand artist and you're like, "Ooh, I can't wait to send, like, that person this one thing."
And maybe there's like failures, like you're trying to send them a sign, they just don't get it. And when
Right.
you try to describe to somebody that like it's impossible to convey the most important part of it, which is the feeling that it gave you, because all they're hearing is just the words that you're using to describe the situation, but they can't understand the feeling. And that's I think the most important part of it because you feel that presence.
Well, okay, and so this also ties back to both Pasulka's book and the psychedelic experience, right? Because if you just talk about UFOs or, extrasensory experiences or high dose psychedelics, or you read about it, you're like, oh, that's kind of a cool phenomenon. Like, I'm hearing these words, I'm hearing these stories, but like, I'm safely maintaining my materialist reality. Until you're the person experiencing it, it's very easy to stay objective. But like once you've occupied that space, it's you can't just deny other people's stories. Near death experiences, suddenly it's like this whole realm of experience opens up. And it's very hard to say, well, like, this experience I had is valid, but this weird thing you're describing is not valid. And so I think that's the part where I continue to think that having psychonauts as part of the research and as part of the development is crucial because there are a lot of doctors walking around thinking they understand, I don't know, what 9 out of 10 pain is, and they don't, or what psychosis is, and many of them don't. So there's so many ways in which we devalidate or unvalidate someone's experience because we haven't had it. And the best thing about psychedelics is like you can just have the experience. It's like, here you go. Here's the pill. Here's the mushroom, whatever it is. Like, you don't have to like wait for a near death experience.
Yeah, it does seem for some reason that the two viewpoints are, I mean, they don't need to be mutually exclusive, but they seem to be in a lot of these circles. So the shamanism aspect of it, which I think goes along with the psychonaut and the exploration sort of intention, and then like the clinical healing intentions of it. I don't know how you bring those two together without, stepping on potential cultural appropriation and things like that. But I do think that there needs to be, like you said, there needs to be a psychonaut in the room or a shaman in the room.
Right. And it's interesting. So I didn't know this, but I just read that Colorado's whole psychedelic program that they're finally rolling out next month, like or 2 months from now, 2025, they actually have two paths for facilitators. One is a clinical path where you're already a doctor or a psychologist or a therapist, and you're just adding on like a extra certification. And then there's this other path for people who've already been facilitating psychedelic experiences to prove to the state that they have the same training as the clinicians got. And I was like, you know what? That's actually really cool because it's not saying the clinical is better than the shaman or the shaman is better than the clinic, approach, but they're acknowledging that people have experience that has nothing to do with therapy, has nothing to do with medicine. It's a totally different skill set. So that was like a kind of little check of like, all right, that makes me feel positive that like someone's moving in the right direction, but then here in our state of Vermont, they convened a working group of mostly mainstream medical folks, a few who are more open-minded than typical, but mostly mainstream folks. And lo and behold, they decided Vermonters aren't ready for legal psychedelics. And I was like, well, maybe you're not the ones who get to decide whether we're ready. And I don't know if you've been paying any attention to like Vermont in the last 50 years, but everyone here has already been experimenting with psychedelics or knows someone who has. So it's like it's just hilarious for the system to say like you're not ready, and meanwhile these people have been doing it for lifetimes. And that's even in white culture. Forget about indigenous culture. It's just such a slap in the face, I feel like, for this like little group of people to say like we've decided you're not ready. It's like based on what?
And these are the same people that are going to support it wholeheartedly when there becomes like a massive, money incentive, a monetary incentive for them to commodify these substances, which I don't know. I am just back and forth on that because I think, and I was thinking about this the other day. I think that one of the main, because like I mean, obviously I've talked about on this podcast and with conversations with friends and things on like the problems with commodification of psychedelics. But I think one of the real benefits of the commodification, at least maybe in my hopeful mind, is the aspect of abuse, because when the market decides who the customers go to, the market seems like it would naturally sort of sift out the people who are, committing abuse, which is, I think, is a big, big problem in this space.
Yeah. I mean, we can hope, and I think it does happen in other fields. So like I kind of keep my like a little pinky on the pulse of some of this stuff, like gymnastics doctors. There was just recently this urologist in New York who had been abusing boys and men through his practice for like, his whole career. And it's like you see, or like that guy who was like an anesthesiologist and then using the drugs he could get as an anesthesiologist to rape women. So it's like it's not a psychedelic problem. It's like a people in positions of authority who have access to drugs deciding to use that to assault people, right? So it's like I would love to just kind of take a bigger view of that and be like, all right, what percentage in different fields of people is this happening? How many people in anesthesiology or in dentistry or in obstetrics? Like how many, and is it a worse problem in psychedelic therapy, or is it actually kind of the similar, problem across medicine? So that's only in the clinical realm. And eventually people get caught, but not without a body count, not without like a lot of victims. It takes so long and so much evidence to bring someone to justice. And I would hope the psychedelic community can do a better job of it. It's just like clearly mainstream medicine is only catching the worst of the worst after decades of abusing people. And we're starting to kind of bring that up to the surface. So maybe we're getting better at it as a whole, but I still think we have a ways to go. I still think it's like abuse in general of children and vulnerable populations is like the final secret, the final taboo, the final thing that, like, Trump's choice for district attorney has a ton of evidence of having paid girls underage to have sex with him and like party with him and do drugs with him. And we're having a debate about whether this should be public knowledge. And it's like, wow, America, we really need to look at our own shadow around this. Like, why are we still debating whether this person should have power over other people's lives? And so, it's like there are so many examples of that where the ethics are just so egregious, and yet we'll kind of like defend the person until it's proven undeniably that they harmed people.
Yeah, not to mention the Epstein situation, the P. Diddy situation that's happening
Yep.
right now. It just it For me, it seems like it permeates our culture. Like, is this type of thing a problem in the Amazon? Is this thing a problem in under quote unquote underdeveloped civilizations throughout the world? It just seems to me like this is like a Western problem. And we have to get to the bottom of what's causing us to act in this way. I just
Yeah. Well, I've obviously thought about this a lot. I've worked with a lot of people who've been survivors of abuse as adults, like from psychedelic therapists, but then I would say over 90% of those people were also abused as children. And so there's this kind of victimization of certain types of people that starts in childhood and then continues through adulthood. And it's very, you can't fall into the trap of being like, well, that person brings about some reaction that warrants abuse. It's like, no, the person is probably vulnerable for lots of different reasons, and abusive people pick up on that, and then it results in, assault. Um, but I don't know. I also think that across human history, maybe one of the biggest advances in Western culture is the increasing age of consent. So if you look in, there's a woman who has basically nullified and made illegal child marriage in, oh, what country in Africa? Where it was like super common that like 9-year-olds were getting married to like 40-year-old men. And so she just kind of came in and she's like, nope, we're not doing that anymore. And she went across the board and was just like, this marriage is not a real marriage. And she just went boom, 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 boom. And so if you increase the age of consent and you make illegal child marriage, I think that that starts to shift the biological drive that the culture says is like okay. I mean, we could go really deep into this and ask like why is that biological drive even there? But I think culturally we are kind of moving in a different direction than hundreds of thousands of years of human history. Now, the real question is maybe in America, where we have long had a practice of the age of consent being at least, 15, 16 years old. In some states, it's 18. Why is it still a problem? It's like I could understand different cultures that are trying to catch up because they've allowed child marriage for so long. They're just kind of starting to get to shift that. Um, but yeah, beyond the age of consent and, like, child marriage, I can't it's like there's a part of my brain that doesn't wanna, like, understand too much more about the roots of, like, why that drive is there, and I still wish that someone with, like, more objectivity could understand from a scientific perspective why it is that some people want to take advantage of children. If they could crack that case, I think there would be a huge amount of healing for a lot of people, including perpetrators. I mean, it's not like obviously if people like P. Diddy and Jeffrey Epstein and Matt Getz or whatever, if they were proud of what they did and they didn't think it was a crime, they wouldn't be trying to hide it. So it's like they also know it's a crime. They know that what they did is really unforgivable. And so that's got to be a level of suffering that I would want to get rid of if I could just wave a magic wand.
Yeah, there could be an aspect of addiction as well that comes into play because addiction can manifest in many different forms. So I almost think of it as like the mind of an addict where, they're doing the thing that they're going to do and they're going to continue to do it because they're not addressing the internal issues that are causing them to do it. But at the same time, they're going to do everything they can to hide it from everyone around
Mm.
them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember talking to there was a woman who, is a steward of Iboga, and she told me that in the Iboga tradition that she was, initiated into, because there are different ones, that pattern of abuse is like a it's like a virus or like a sickness that kinda comes through different families, different relationships, but it's something that actually can be healed, but we don't understand, like, it's not a medical issue, it's not a psychological issue, it's like a deep and spiritual isn't even the right word, but she said iboga can show people the roots of even something like that, and she called it like a sickness or a virus. But we have to be willing to understand the answer, and most people don't want to understand the answer. They want it to be like there are bad people and good people, and I'll avoid the bad people and punish them. But she said, and I haven't experienced iboga, so I don't know, this is just what she said, that iboga will show you the real roots of why that behavior manifested, and that's why for a lot of people it's more than they can take, and it takes so long to integrate because it's not an easy answer.
Yeah, Boga is a pretty crazy one. I haven't experienced it either, but I have heard some amazing stories of healing. One really quickly was I heard of this guy who went down to, I think it was Mexico or something, to do Iboga, and he was a heroin addict and he was real bad. And he went down, went through his journey, and as he was in the middle of one of his journeys, he remembered that he had like stashed with him a needle with heroin in it in his bag. So he went to the bag, he grabbed the needle mid experience, and he shot up heroin. And what ensued was just an absolute spiral into the deepest darkness he could ever have imagined. And it essentially, like, that experience in itself was the agent of healing for him to get off of the heroin. And the next day, when the experience was done, or maybe it was the next two, because it takes a while,
Yep.
he realized that he never packed a needle with him. That was a complete, like,
Oh,
I don't want to say a fabrication, but just that was total visionary experience. He never actually physically did that.
oh, that's so cool. Yeah, a couple of years ago, I really wanted to go experience iboga. I I got the EKG, I was all ready to go, and then it's weird, actually, I started having experiences that I don't even think I can put into words, but it felt like iboga was already showing me the answer that I was seeking, and I got a glimpse into, like, the true, like, grandness of the answer, but it was just kinda showing me, like, a tip of the iceberg, and from that glimpse, I was like, maybe right now when my book is about to come out and I've got 2 little kids and I've just moved back to the States and we're still kinda coming through this pandemic, maybe I don't need the full answer right now." And it felt so nice for a medicine to, like, give me that heads up. And when I told the woman that I was gonna go take it with, she was like, "Yeah, that iboga does work that way. Like, as soon as you ask for its help and you set that intention, you may not even need to ingest it right away that moment." But it's like, to me, it feels like iboga's been, I have another friend who takes very high doses of mushrooms, but he said when iboga calls, he hangs up the phone. It's just like I feel like Iboga and I keep having these long distance phone calls where I'm just like, "I'll see you someday." Like, you're like a distant relative, and it's just like, maybe when I'm like 80, but, like, for now, I just like, it gives me these quick little tidbits, and I'm like, "That's good enough for now." Like, maybe next lifetime.
Oh, I have the same relationship with ayahuasca. It's the same thing for me because, I'm studying under a shaman right now. Like, ayahuasca is so interesting to me. It's of deep interest, but I haven't done it yet. And I haven't pulled the trigger. And like you said, it's almost like it's giving me these little signs and we're having a little powwow, but haven't pulled the trigger yet. But eventually I think it'll happen.
Yeah. I mean, I've only had one experience with ayahuasca. It was very unusual because I wasn't in a group setting. I was in the United States. I wasn't, like, in a place where there was the cultural kind of backdrop for the whole ceremony. I was super depressed at the time. My sister's death had happened a year before, and um, it felt like ayahuasca was, like, kind of pissed that I had showed up, but, like, once I had showed up, it was like, "Fine, let me, like, actually show you what's really going on here." So it's like the answer was really a hard answer, but it was enough to kinda shape maybe, 10 years worth of other decisions I made after that, and then since then, I've never felt called to do it again, ever, like, not even remotely. And so, like, my experience of ayahuasca was, like, it was a very harsh teacher, but it was almost like, "Why have you been playing around with your life expecting things to work out for you? And, like, I'm just gonna sit you down right now and show you, like, this is bad for you. This is what's really happening here in your family. This is how you're avoiding this. This is what you do because you're in pain." And I was like, "Oh my god, like, what a bummer." It's like mushrooms are so much nicer, or it's like LSD is just like, let's have fun. And ayahuasca's like, all right, here we go. Like another one of those showed up, and I have to like, slap her around a little bit and get her to like actually pay attention.
Yeah, for sure. Mushrooms can be that way too. Oh man, sometimes like I go in and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be a nice, fun, happy trip like last time, and then it's just like, oh, you think that's gonna happen this time again? You're gonna try to recreate that beautiful God experience. I'm just gonna slap you down and show you what's going on. And oh man, it can get rough in there too. All of them can be rough.
Well, the way I have re-friended or re-befriended mushrooms recently is as I talk about in my book, there was a period of time where after my son was born, so I had these three experiences, two before my daughter was born, one before my son was born. And then after that, the mushrooms like kind of stopped working. And every time I would take some, I would just feel like nauseous and drunk and like spinning and just like weird visions. But it was just so, it was not cohesive at all. And I felt like the mushrooms had kind of like given up on me. And they're like, "Come on, we showed you all this amazing stuff, and now we've moved on. Like we're too busy like trying to, I don't know, get Compass Pathways to spend $100 million on legalizing us, whatever." And then a friend brought a small dose to me, when I was living in Bermuda, and I got, like, nervous because I was like, "Oh, no, I can't believe she brought this through customs." But then I didn't wanna bring it back, so I was like, "I have to take it here," and I assumed it wouldn't do anything. But it was amazing, and then I was like the joke was that, like, the microdosing protocol that I had been kind of poo-pooing because I had always been trained in the macrodose, now the microdose is like my best friend. But not only that, it's not even a microdose. I can't find a microdose because I detect the psilocybin no matter how little there is. And so, in a funny way, because of my relationship with the high dose mushroom experiences, now I can take just a tiny amount and get this like as much out of it as I used to get out of this huge experience. And so it's almost like it feels like the mushrooms met me like way more than halfway. They're like, "All right, lady, like you've got two little kids, you've got a busy life, you don't have 8 hours now and like 2 weeks to integrate and like the whole shebang. So we're just gonna, have these like little, like we'll come over for tea, and hang out for a few hours and then you can go about your day."
You know, I so relate to that relationship. I feel the same way because having done a lot of the high doses now, like I haven't done a high dose in years. It's been a really long time. I just do lower doses now. And, there were times where after the high doses, I would try to do what I would normally think is a low dose and just do something to have fun and have an absolutely like horrific time because all the mushroom wants to do is just bring me back to that place, but
Mm,
just on a lower dose. And I
yep.
feel like that is persistent, among even my lower dose experiences. It's almost like when you open that door, you don't have to push as hard to open it again.
Yes. Yeah, or the way that my friend who has done, she's actually living in Jamaica now, but she trained under, Kalindi, the, like,
Mm.
original high dose, kind of like superhero. That was his whole mentality, like, "Why are you guys playing around with these low doses? Like, you're supposed to become, like, superhuman, like, kinda get with the program." So, with her training with those super high doses, she said that she has seen this before, that, like, the mushrooms, she's like, "Oh, you're, like, inoculated. Like, they've colonized you. So now your body recognizes psilocybin, and it's like it doesn't require such fuel to, like, get the whole thing going." And I feel like this ties back to what we were talking about in the beginning, which is, like, this agency. Like, what is it in this chemical, in this mushroom, that can adapt to human intention? Like, that goes against all of the science I've ever learned, like dose response curve, and like you need more of something to get more of an effect. And if you take too little, you won't, get any of the benefits. But in a weird way, it's like, and I don't know how common this is. So if I were still in science, I would want to be studying people like me or you or like other folks who say this happens. And is it a physiological sensitivity? Rick Strassman, when I was telling him about it, he said it's like Hebbian learning. It's like what fires together wires together. So if your brain practices the space of psilocybin enough times, that like the tiniest little bit of the chemical will trigger the whole brain network anyway, and you don't need the amount of fuel you used to need. But again, that's just a theory. Like that would be actually really cool if it was true. People wouldn't need 5 grams. They would just need, maybe one or two big sessions in a controlled setting, and then after that, never need a high dose and all of the risks that go along with it. Like, that's a super sustainable model for our modern lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for the medical model, that seems perfect because you don't necessarily want to, like, I know some people can claim to be miraculously healed in one or two experiences, but then if you're able to sort of supplement them every few months, every 6 months or so with a smaller dose to maintain the benefits of their large experience, I think that would be a beautiful way to go about it. But it does seem that, and this is, I think, the most important part of any psychedelic experience is the intention. Like, what's your intention? If your intention is to heal from trauma, that might be a really great way to do it. If your intention is to, as Kalindi would say, explore the realms of legend, then 50 grams might be the way to do it.
Right. I forget who it was that said this originally, but I kind of also very similar to how these aliens show up. So, like, what if the mushroom, similar to whatever this alien intelligence is, needs to show up in a way that you think you need? So, like, originally for me, it showed up as 5 grams because 5 grams I knew from Terrence McKenna was like the hero's dose. 5 grams was what we were giving people equivalent at Hopkins. So it's like when I had my 5 gram experience, even though it wasn't as intense as I thought it could be, it was enough to produce access to a very different space that I had never accessed before, right? And then maybe the mushroom is like, all right, like we got her hooked with that vision or version of us that she would recognize. And then we're going to give her a little break. She can think about it, contemplate it, live her life, integrate, and then we'll kind of show up in this different form that she's also kind of heard about but made fun of, like microdosing. That's funny, haha. And then they show up and they're like, look at us. We did it this way too. And so I get super interested in that too. It's like, like, well, I say in my book also that I think every version of another reality needs to first show up in a form that you can recognize. And for me, it was always in a particular like package. So mushrooms, 5 grams, like God as Ganesh, this Hindu god, right? That was like a lot more accessible and interesting and kind of cool compared to the God I grew up with, Jesus. I mean, he's also pretty cool. Like, if you didn't know about Christianity and Jesus showed up, you'd be like, this is a really cool God. Like, how did I get this guy? But for me, that would have been like, bland, boring. So instead, I get Ganesh. But then the thing that showed up as Ganesh, like, what is that? Who is that?
A great question. And you bring up your book, and as we begin to sort of reach an hour here, I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to
Yeah.
discuss
I
this
know we could
book.
just go on and on. People are gonna be like, "What is this conversation even about?" I have no idea.
Oh, they're gonna love it, I promise. But your book, Midnight Water, a psychedelic memoir, fantastic, by the way, reads like a novel. So it after reading that book, it seems like your life has been a series of like unwelcome but valuable initiations into the underworld. Would you characterize it as that? And also,
Yes, I love it. No,
d-
and I mean, it's funny because it's like, it's just now that I'm spending a lot more time alone. I spend most of my days looking at trees, not humans. I see, like, right now there's a bunch of turkeys out in the field, it's raining, but I'm not seeing other humans around me. It's like very much the world of non-human intelligence. And then I thought back and I was like, when I was 10, my mom actually is the one who pointed this out because we're talking about like the social stuff girls go through in middle school and late elementary school and how it just really wears on some people's psyches. Like, who am I friends with? Am I cool? Am I accepted? Boys go through it too. And she said, "Well, Kath, you just kind of avoided all of that." And I was like, "Well, how?" And she goes, "Because you were just always in the woods by yourself. It was like you and your one best friend." And I was like, "Oh my God." Like, I'm finally living my fantasy that I had when I was 10 years old to be like mostly in the woods in nature by myself, exploring these realms of consciousness. So it almost feels like the story that I wrote in Midnight Water was like the end of like a life that, except for a couple of years in middle school, I had really deviated from my purpose. And I had great versions of purpose. I was a very successful academic. I was a very successful athlete. I made it onto faculty at Johns Hopkins. I was even really good at helping my sister die. But it's like all of those things weren't actually aligned with the thing that made my heart really full, which is just being in nature and playing and exploring that world without the need for it to be anything other than just what it was. And so it kind of feels like, yes, I had all of those unexpected but intentional experiences that kind of like shook me out of like a rut that I was in that I didn't even know was a rut. It shook me just enough. Each one, like the death of my sister, the even before that, the dissolution experience when I was meditating, where everything blew apart, the death of this young man in Nepal, eventually my dad's, journey with cancer and his death. It's like, man, I needed a lot of jolts to get out of that rut. And even now, I find myself starting to like accidentally find my way back into that rut, and like a jolt will happen and I'll be like, "Thank you, universe. God, I'm so stubborn. Like, thank you for jumping me out of that rut again. Like, why do I keep wanting to fall back in there?" So yeah, it's like, yes, I love the underworld, and also like I think I'm trying to relate to it differently now where I don't need to like it doesn't need to like shock me to get me to remember what I really care about.
yeah, and I think one of the really intense parts of all the events that happened in your book, where all these ruts were taking place, is a lot of them overlapped each other, happened at the same time. I mean, you didn't mention, the birth of your children as well, like going along. Like it's just there were a lot of successive things that happened to you that I understand put you in these ruts. It's a very common thing. I feel like I don't know if it's an American thing or if it's a westernized thing, but we seem to be like magnetically attracted to falling into these ruts, and it's
Mhm.
nice to have some outlets and some things, especially if the universe is looking out for you to break you out of those.
Well, so okay, so I really wanna I mean, Midnight Water, speaks for itself. In so many ways, I feel like it's perfect. It couldn't have been better. It couldn't have been different. I'm so proud of it. And it's the reason it reads like a novel is because it's about a person who's no longer in existence, right? It's like I get to be somebody else now. But interestingly, as soon as I published my book, I was on the local school board. I live in a very rural part of Vermont. There's a lot of economic hardship. It's pretty conservative, but a lot of people are also very like libertarian. Like it's called, it's like come to Vermont, do what you want. It's very like live free or die, even though that's the New Hampshire motto. And the principal asked me to teach math. And I was like, sure, I can teach math. I love math, right? And so I'm back in a high school environment for the first time in, 20 years. And everything is different, right? The cell phones, the just the total lack of um interest or respect in like what elders and wise people, adults have to say. Um it was like a big shock for me to realize that like not only can I not go back to my own past, but like the world that I left is not any better since I left it. It's gotten way worse. And so I really trudged through and I felt like that savior complex, like I'm going to teach these kids math, I'm going to get these kids to graduate. And there were triumphs for sure. But toward the end of the school year, something happened and I'll protect people's privacy, but you know, like who I am as a psychedelic researcher came head to head with who a lot of the folks in this community are. And it was this moment of conflict where I was like, I could keep pushing to keep myself inserted in this role, or I could take this as a big sign from the universe. It's like, hey, you're a little too much the way you are and what you stand for this culture that is in many ways, many decades in the past, and they'll catch up to you. But right now, they can't see what you're bringing. They can't see the form of intelligence that you have. And it's fine. It's like they're allowed to be who they are, and you can retreat back into that weird underworld, crazy place that you occupy that most people don't want to occupy. Like, you don't have to keep inserting yourself back into mainstream culture to try to fit in or to try to prove yourself. Um, which is not to say that it was easy. It's like when it was happening, I was really upset. There was like still a part of me that thought, oh, I'm just taking a detour from regular life and I'll just pop back in when I'm ready. Like I'll just be an ordinary person again. It's like, no, it's like this wasn't a detour. This wasn't like a rest stop and you're back on the highway. This is like a totally new path. And people have walked it before, but maybe not so many people who look like me were born into a culture that I was born into. And you now don't get back on the mainstream. You get to like forge your own path. And so hopefully eventually other people can walk that path. But like it's not gonna be easy. Like, sorry. You're in the wilderness now and you're doing a great job, but like you can't go back.
So ultimately, do you think that it's a positive thing just in general? Like it's not a negative. It's more of you're going in the correct direction.
I don't know if there's a correct direction. I think for each person, given their tolerance for both risk and new experiences, finds their edge. Like, what's the edge that that person can handle? And I just think I have a very high risk tolerance. I have a very high openness to new experiences. And because of my past experiences with death, it's like, man, even death is only like scary like 2% of the time. It's not zero yet. So, like, I think I'm one of the people who gets to forge that other path. And there are plenty of people forging equally challenging paths that, like, people in education, that's a really hard path. And it was humbling for me to have to admit that like I had done all this hard stuff. So I figured, how hard could it be to be a math teacher? Hard, really, really hard, because it's not my purpose. It's not what I'm here to do.
Yeah, and kind of you reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from your book. It was pretty close to the beginning, I believe, and you were talking about your work at Hopkins, and it was be careful when you're climbing the ladder of success because you might get to the top and realize it's leaning against the wrong wall. And
Yes.
oh, that hit me hard. I was like, damn, that is a great quote.
Yeah. And you know who said that? So the woman who told me that was a woman named Julie. She was on the trip in Nepal with me. I that I so Just a little bit of backstory. I went on a retreat with Joan Halifax at her Zen center in New Mexico because for all of 2012, I was existing in this like kind of psychotic, psychedelic, spiritual space where reality was very different than consensus reality. I went to Upaya, met Joan. She like really helped me get my brain back in some very sane, kind of clear, straight and narrow path. And then kind of like casually said, "You should come to Nepal." And then my sister dies like a month later. And I reached out to her because she's the missed, being with dying person. And she said, "You can come to Nepal, but the real question is, are you going back to Hopkins?" And like she could tell that the trip to Nepal was like the jumping off point. And so when I got to Nepal, it felt like a death. I had shaved my hair off. I was carrying my sister's ashes, and I was like, I don't know if I'm coming back, even though my mom made me promise I would. But like, it really felt like I was saying goodbye to everything I knew. And one of the first people I met there was this woman, Julie, and she was a palliative care doctor, and she had made tenure at University of Virginia, I believe. And she thought it would be this like moment where she could say like, it's very hard as a woman to make tenure in these old institutions. I think at Hopkins the ratio is like 1 to 1,000 of women to men who've made tenure. And she said the moment she got tenure was like one of the emptiest moments of her life, because she nothing that she thought she would get came with that designation. And she was the one who told me that quote. So fast forward a little bit, she was the person who fell into the river at the end of our trip, who my friend Tiring and her friend too dove in to save her life. And, it's like they traded places. But it's like all that got emblazoned on my brain because it's just like this woman is telling me you can do everything right and still feel empty at the end. And by the way, also, you might die tomorrow. And this young person might die instead of you. And so it's like it all just like, whoa, it hit me. Like, I better get off this fucking ladder. Like, I don't, what else more do I need, right?
Wow, what a teaching. Yeah, there's so many aspects of that that are just like so poignant.
Yeah. And I think for someone hearing this for the first time, they're just like, did all of this stuff really happen? Yes. I can't explain why it was one after the other of these like epic life lessons. I mean, truly, like the death of some, like watching people die one way and then another way and then another way. And it's like everywhere I turned, it's like there's no hiding from this. It's everywhere. Okay. And then it's like birth. And birth is one way, but it's also this other way. And pain is this way, but it's also this other way. So it felt like that 10 years was like this like compacted like tutorial in human life. They're like, all right, we're just gonna like load her up with all of this stuff. And then once she gets to a place where she can just settle, then we'll get to see the impact of those lessons.
Yeah, and it seems like also it's a lesson in attachment as well because you're attached to death as one way, and then it presents itself in another way. You're attached to birth as in one way, and then it presents itself in a whole nother way. It
Right.
like, man, incredible.
Well, so I also have to share this other funny, it's not funny, but it's a synchronicity. And it's just so weird that this happened right now before we had this conversation. So in 2012, I had this experience where I was meditating, everything, the whole universe blew up. There was nothing left. And then I kind of got to be reincarnated on Earth and just see the amazingness of life. Um, right after I had that experience, I went back to Hopkins and got pneumonia. And I got pneumonia probably because I was stressed, probably because I picked up some bacteria or virus, but also because I was doing this really intense energetic work with people on psilocybin. And so a lot of the recovery in 2012 was not just psychic, it wasn't just spiritual, it was also in my body. Well, I got pneumonia again at the end of writing Midnight Water. Again, out of nowhere. I went from finishing the book 1 week to like the next Tuesday, I had pneumonia. I was in the ER. Again, healing, going slow. Well, I just got pneumonia again a couple weeks ago on election day. And yes, it is kind of an ending for me, but it's also this ending for a lot of people, right? Is like, what is coming next? And so I just feel grateful that I've had these experiences of like death happens, everything gets annihilated, and yet you start over, and you start over with what you've got and you make the best of it. And I also feel grateful that my body knows to make sure that I slow down at these moments and don't just keep like shoving forward with whatever prior ideas I have. And so I'm just like, I don't know why pneumonia and I are like, it's like COVID, it's like mushrooms, it's like pneumonia is another friend of mine that like comes about to demarcate these transitions and like get everything to go slowly. So I just, now that I'm out of it and I don't feel like I'm going to die, I think it's funny.
Yeah, as we become, we start to come to a close here, I kind of feel called to share a little synchronicity of my own. So when I was reading your book, as I was finishing it, um, so after work, generally, I would grab the book, read it until my fiance comes home from work. And then, I would stop and we'd hang out and do our thing as we always do. But the one night I was reading it, she came in and I just decided to keep reading. And she sat down and I was nearing the end of the book. And, she just pulled out her phone just to unwind and she's just kind of scrolling through Instagram, looking at reels. And, normally she's got the sound kind of off or like really low, but this time the sound is pretty high. And I get to the point in the book, and like even thinking about it, it's kind of crazy to me. I get to the point in the book where you start to describe how you listened to the song Crossroads by Bone Thugs and Harmony,
Yeah,
which I've always loved Bone Thugs and Harmony ever since I was a little kid. And right as I'm reading the words, on her phone starts blaring, "See you at the crossroads," and I was like, "What the hell?" Like, no way. Like, of all the Bone Thugs songs too, and that
right.
one comes on the second I'm reading that sentence. It was
Amazing.
wild to me.
And I'm sure to her, she was just like in Instagram mode. So it's like the synchronicity was maybe interesting because you experienced it, but she didn't. So it's like moving on.
Yeah, I stopped, I closed the book, and I was like, "Do you know what just happened here?" And, I mean, obviously, like, being with me and, like, understanding, we've taken journeys together and all that, she understood it, but, yeah, to me, it was just wild.
Whoa. That's so cool. I'm so glad you had that experience. I mean, I've definitely had people reading my book have some form of like a psychedelic or synchronous experience and then be like, "What is this thing? Like, what is this book?" And I was like, "It's not a book, it's a drug."
Absolutely. And that being said, can you share where people can get the book, where people can find you, anything you might want to promote?
Yeah, so I over the last several months, I did a really intentional job of drawing in most of the energy from the book to the place where I live, which is the land that I'm on in southern Vermont called the Being Ground. So I got all the print copies back here in my house. So now every order that someone makes on my website, I physically send it out, which just feels like super intentional and awesome to me. And then I get to actually read the names of the people who it's going to, and it feels so much more in alignment than like people buying stuff off Amazon, even though it's great that that's accessible. So that's super easy now, and my rural post office just gets such a kick out of me. I come in with like my 5 books and I'm like, "5 more media mail," and they just are like, "Who is this lady?" Like, so that's super fun, and, there's also some other kinda stuff for sale on my website, more of just the stuff that my artist friends or, like, my brother and I kinda craft together, and we're like, "Maybe somebody's interested in this." So, that's all at katherinemaclean.org. I did make the concession to keep the ebook and the audiobook on the Amazon, affiliates, so Kindle and Audible. The audiobook is coming back out, I think, in about a month. I want it to be December 12th because it's like such a cool date, 12/12/24. And I'm going to try to make that happen. But I think Audible also may have some procedure where they slot it in and then you hope for the best. Um, and yeah, otherwise it's like I'm here in southern Vermont in the middle of nowhere. I want to start having gatherings on my land, and I just am trying to decide how to do that, when to do it, with intention, how big to do it, so that it really lasts and it has a big impact.
Yeah, and I love that you read the audiobook yourself because if someone else would have read it, it just wouldn't have come across the same way.
Yeah.
And also your podcast too.
Oh yeah. So this project that we've worked on together, I've recorded maybe 4 episodes with Eileen Hall, who was the artist who did the cover art for Midnight Water. And we kind of approach these topics that come through the book but are not really developed in the book with people who are kind of connected to me or Eileen in the world, but are not necessarily, their stories aren't in Midnight Water. So we've got this one fellow, Charles Lawrence, who's the only 90-year-old I've ever been friends with. He just turned 90, which is amazing. And he's this awesome elder, shaman, and pipe carrier, ceremonialist. And his episode is called Thunder and Lightning because he's been struck by lightning twice. And then we've got this amazing death doula, Rebecca Dawn, who I met at a mushroom conference. Just like lots of kind of eccentric folks who've been in these underworld spaces, in these liminal spaces. And yeah, just kind of waiting for that next person to materialize as we do more episodes. But it's like a very slow burn kind of podcast. So let's see, that's on all of the basic channels, Spotify, Apple, everything. It's called Midnight Water Dialogues in the Labyrinth.
Very fitting name. Catherine, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming back on the show and would love to do it again.
Yeah, it was super fun as always.